Next up, we have Landon Dickerson, the center out of Alabama, who, for me, I have to assume he's one of the more difficult evaluations for pro evaluators at the next level, just out of anybody this draft season, right? Because as we're going to touch on here and right away, his whole thing is injuries, right? That's really the major concern with Landon. And I know if you ask him, he says it's not a concern, but it most certainly is, right? And I'm the film guy. I'm not a doctor. I'm not here to talk about whether or not I think he'll be able to recover this and that and the third. But just looking from the outside in, I'm going to read you off some of the injuries that he's had and tell me, whether or not this sounds like a red flag. So, 2016 tears his right ACL. 2017 in October, ankle surgery. Ankle injury in 2018, followed by then a ligament damage in his left knee in December of 2020. So, that's been his college career, right? Started at Florida State for those first 3 years, and then transferred as a grad transfer into Alabama, and has been playing the whole time. Right, when healthy, was actually the first true freshman offensive lineman to start at Florida State since 1982, I believe it said, which obviously is a magnificent feat in its own right. But how much stock can we put in you if you're not going to be available, right? And testament to him for sticking with it. Obviously, just to personalize this a little bit, I can kind of resonate with Landon and some of his struggles at Alabama and Florida State. As I mean, my college career was certainly plagued by injuries, right? I've talked about it before, obviously, but if you're new, go into college at Hillsdale 2 weeks into my first freshman camp, right? And we find out that my shoulder's dislocating. I have a torn labrum as well as some other bone issues there. Going to be out for 6 months after surgery. Now we're looking at a January, February recovery. I come back, really the first time that I had started running again. And in one of the flukiest things I've ever seen, my foot sort of gets stuck on the ground, turns as we're doing a workout up in the gym. And I tear the labrum in my hip, right? Out for, by the time they fully diagnose it, do physical therapy before surgery, because, that's a really intrusive thing. It's now August, right? That subsequent August, now the start of my sophomore year. You get surgery out all the way through to next March, April, right? And then a couple years later, actually that next year for spring, have a Liz Frank ligament tear in my foot, which it's just sort of a laundry list thing in terms of the major injuries. And I feel like a lot of times they sort of snowball one into the next, right? Because at least for me, when I was out with my shoulder injury, we were pushing my lower body as hard as we physically could, right? Whether it was just simple walking lunges or leg press or any and everything that we could, hip thrust, whatever it was. And the next thing you know, I get back out there and I have a lower body injury, right? And I feel like those things kind of snowball. Well, then also off my hip, after being on crutches for who knows how long during that 12-month span, very soon after, have a weird and very rare ligament tear in your foot, right? So it feels like for me, at least in my experience, my injuries have kind of snowballed one into the next. Where Landon, they've all been lower body injuries, right? So is that more concerning? Is that less concerning? I'm not entirely sure, but regardless, obviously, respect for him to keeping with it. I can tell you, it gets pretty annoying when you're out after 1, 2, 3 injuries. How many people come up to you and ask you, hey, when are you going to retire? When are you going to become a student coach? And those things really get on your nerves, right? And especially a guy like Landon, who clearly loves football, right? Graduates and goes and plays somewhere else. A lot of respect for him to keep playing and at a high level. A lot of people seem to think that injuries automatically mean that you're going to get worse. Well, I would say that my junior and senior seasons, when I was predominantly healthy, that was the best football I ever played, right? And with Landon, I would I would wager that what he just did at Alabama this past season, for the most part, when he was healthy, was some of, if not the best football he's ever played. And I think that people think that injuries equal worse. Well, I think injuries more so change the way you play than anything else, right? It's only a question of, are you going to have lingering injuries, and is it going to snowball into more things? And instead of concussion, like we saw in the Jalen Phillips video, that's significantly different than Landon, right? Phillips, who had 4 concussions prior to transfer. That's radically different than a guy who's just had different lower body injuries. You know, you can argue that once the lower body one is fixed, it's fixed, right? At least that's been my experience, right? I don't have shoulder pain since my shoulder surgery. I don't have hip pain since my hip surgery. You know, it's just that sort of wear and tear on the other parts of your body that have been that sort of bit me, I guess, right? And with Landon, it may or may not be the same thing. It certainly looks that way from the outside looking in. But with that being said, because I'm not a doctor, like I said, I didn't account for that at all in his grade. And just like I haven't for anybody, right? If the doctors say he's not cleared or they have concerns, that's fine. And I can totally understand why you would after that sort of laundry list that I read through there. I mean, he had only played really one full season in 2019, right? So, I mean, there's got to be concerns there. And how those manifest on your grade chart, grade template, you know, whether it's just a flat minus 5%, minus 10%, whatever it is, or just a red flags, minus 5 points. I don't know how you would want to do it if you were the one actually pulling the trigger and making this decision, but it most certainly has to factor in, I would imagine, with Landon more so than some of the other guys that we've watched, right? But into the film, which may or may not even be applicable anymore, right? Because like I said, injuries change the way you play from time to time. Well, very well could have with Landon, right? Maybe he's going to come back, and whereas I say his power and strength was a 9.5 out of 15, maybe he'll be stronger than he ever was when he returns later this year. So it's tough to really gauge the Landon Dickerson that we're going to be getting off of what we saw. But obviously, I'm going to try my best, right? So pass protection, I thought he was very solid. I think that one thing that kind of surprised me was actually how agile on his feet he was, and that showed particularly as a pass blocker when guys were trying to counter back and forth from edge to edge against him. I thought he did a really good job of cutting guys off with his feet in that regard. In terms of the run blocking, I felt like he's an interesting guy, right? Because just flat down blocking and drive blocking guys and just motoring them off the line of scrimmage, that wasn't nearly as much a part of his game as was the more dynamic blocks in space. You know, he's just first step wise, very often just beating people to the spot on, say, a reach block and winning with that positioning, right? More so than anything else, more so than really anybody that we've seen so far out of the interior O linemen. So many of these guys, like I said in the Aaron Banks video, if you guys haven't seen that, obviously click the link above my head. But, you know, that's the type of guy who, you know, you ask him to go in space at 330 pounds, potentially more, right? Obviously, I said there was some debate on his weight, but you wouldn't want to ask him to play in space. Whereas I think Landon actually was more dynamic in space than he was just straight line blocking. So that's why I gave him the 12.25 there. If he is able to, at least in my opinion, get a little bit stronger, potentially maybe play with a little bit better leverage to get his lower body into it, as that may or may not be difficult for him with that sort of injury history. I think that he could potentially get stronger as well as potentially increase that run blocking grade. It's just a question then of now you're not only going up against college guys, now you're facing the best of the best. So will he be able to improve and get better, or will he get exposed in a sense even more so at the next level? Not entirely sure, right? That's obviously kind of what we're going to have to wait and see on. In terms of the balance and leverage, like I said, a lot of times I feel like he was playing a little bit too upright in that regard. We would see him sort of falling off of his blocks, having a heavy head at times, sort of lunging for guys. I feel like there were just some various concerns there, and that's sort of why I felt like he did struggle more so at the point of attack than he did when he was so that guy going for backside and front side cutoffs and reach blocks and those sort of things. I felt like engaging that lower body more and playing a little bit lower, getting your center of gravity lower to the ground, I just felt like that would have benefited him quite a bit against whether it was the bigger, stronger defensive tackles or just some of these quicker guys as he's trying to cut them off in space, which, as I said, he was definitely good at, but at the next level, they're even quicker, right? So I think that's definitely going to be a sort of question mark, at least in my eyes, one of the bigger ones going forward. In terms of physicality and finishing, I wouldn't necessarily say he was the most physical guy, in all honesty. Like I said, sort of in the power and strength category, it didn't seem like that was necessarily his game as much as it was some of the other guys. He was definitely playing hard, no question, but I would say the amount of times we saw him just flat dominating guys and driving guys off the ball and reestablishing the line of scrimmage, 3, 4, or 5 yards downfield, I just didn't quite see that nearly as much with Landon as I did other guys. When it comes to displacing guys from gaps, again, he was great. Will he still be great after injury? That'll be a question we have to see, but I think his game is more so in the mobility category, whereas a lot of other guys are inverse, right? A lot of the other guys are inverse. And when I say mobility, in terms of just, straight trap pulling, wrapping up a hole, climbing to the second level, whatever it is that you asked him to do in space or reach blocking, as I said, very positive in that regard. 8.5 out of 10. Was he the next Jason Kelsey? No, probably not. But he was definitely one of the better prospects that I've at least seen in recent memory. In terms of IQ and awareness, I guess I skipped over that. I felt like he was solid. This wasn't a bad grade by any means. There were just a couple times where I felt like guys were catching him off guard. And, the problem with being a center is that you're sort of, obviously, as the name suggests, at the center of the offensive line, to where you have to be paying attention a little bit to what's going on both sides of you, or else you're going to be caught off guard, depending on the protection scheme, obviously. But it just felt like sometimes he could have done a better job of anticipating things and knowing where guys were going based off maybe their cues, or how they were lined up off the ball, whether they were slanted, not slanted, whatever various things there were. I feel like he just could have done a slightly better job reading that. I also felt like sometimes when he was climbing to the second level, you'd see him play with his head down a little bit, to the point where he would lose sight of the guys he was blocking to. Obviously, that's not a huge concern. You can most certainly work on that. But it did seem like from time to time when he was missing those second level assignments, it was due to just sort of firing off the snap with his head more so at the dirt than it was at that guy that he was supposed to be blocking. But otherwise, 4.5 out of 5 on size. As I said, 6'6". That's definitely more than what you need at that center position, as well as I give him 4.5 out of 5 athleticism. That might be a little bit controversial given the injuries, but I did think just in space, he was one of the better guys that we've seen. And obviously, we don't have the pro day numbers. At the pro day, I mean, at least in one of the Mac Jones interviews, you see him in the background. He's doing like cartwheels and all this stuff. So I think he's definitely a freaky athlete, regardless of whether or not we had those testing numbers. And the only question to me then is how freaky will he remain coming back from the injuries, right? Overall comes out to a 76 out of 100. Very solid grade, right? Put that on the big board then. As you'll see, he is the only center that I had graded to this point, but relative to the other guards, was the third highest interior offensive lineman that I've done so far. So probably only going to do 5. I think I'm going to cut it a little bit shorter here just because we are getting so close to the NFL draft, but was definitely solid, right? I know some people would probably have him a little bit higher. I've seen him in that first round discussion. For me, I just wouldn't quite go that high, and that's not even considering the injuries, right? So add in the injury concern, and I would maybe prefer him even later than this, right? Like I said, I'm not a doctor, so I'm not even going to say, but if there were concerns, it would have to impact his grade in some way, right? But overall, no, I think he's a definitely solid prospect. He's a guy who clearly loves the game, right? I like the way he plays the game. I think that he has a unique play style in terms of the fact that he's doing stuff that not a lot of the other interior offensive linemen were doing, right? So many of them were power and strength driven, whereas he, at least for me, was more better at getting into the correct positioning and then working from there. Which one is easier to teach, right? Is it easier to teach somebody how to consistently lock down a reach block, or is it easier to bring up somebody's bench press, right? Obviously, that's a debate to be had. I would argue that I'd probably take the more refined guy in most cases, which is obviously why you do see him above, say, a Trey Smith, right, who is more so the physical specimen that failed to execute most of the techniques, whereas I think Landon's kind of the opposite of that. And I almost forgot, actually, I did want to bring up one other thing when I was watching his pass blocking in terms of the IQ and awareness. I forgot to mention this point because I was going through my head, why did I give him 6.75? One thing that he did that was, kind of getting on my nerves a little bit was on plays where he didn't have a man directly lined up on him, right? So he's the freed up man, whether it's, say, his own protection scheme and he's got his right side A gap, right, or anything that crosses his face thereafter. One thing that he would do off the snap is like take his arms, I don't know if you can see this, and like put them at his sides, like straight out like this, and like just like be kind of waiting for guys. Well, you have no strength and power down here. Like guys are just going to be able to run straight through that arm. I don't know what he was doing there. People who don't know what they're watching might think that's super positive because that's gonna stop guys from getting in that gap. They might think that's great IQ and awareness. I think that was just the dumbest thing I've ever seen. As an offensive lineman, you want to get your hands as tight together as possible for when you throw them and hit the defensive lineman, to have both of them just way out here in space doing whatever. I'm not sure what he was doing there. I can understand maybe you having one hand sort of out a little bit in case you're worried about a guy maybe spiking across your face so you can kind of catch him. But the way he was having him, man, I didn't know if he was like trying to spin a hula hoop or something around him. It was just weird how low he had his hands at times and how wide he had them in that regard. So that was one of the reasons I did dock him a couple points there, because it might come off as high IQ and awareness to be watching both gaps, but if you're watching both gaps like that, you're really watching no gaps, right? And that was one thing that bothered me, was just it felt like he was late to time his punches because he had so far to go to get from here from here to here to here, right? It just that's an elongated process that's not necessary by any means. I'd rather have your head on a swivel than your head fixated and your hands just flying out in no man's land. So that was one of the other things that I wanted to bring up there. And one of the reasons he might be a little bit lower on my big board than a lot of other people's. But obviously, again, that's something that you can teach, no question, at the next level. So with that being said, I think that's about all I have for you guys today. Obviously, who knows how he's going to recover from this latest injury. Maybe that grade just goes right in the trash and he's a completely different player. Obviously, we have no clue kind of which way it's going to go, but I guess that's the whole fun of the NFL draft in some regard. So if you guys had thoughts on my grade on Landon, at least what he did show in the 4 games that I watched of him last year, let me know in the comment section down below, right? Do you think he should be higher? Do you think he should be lower relative to the other offensive linemen? Do you agree that you would have him at least below, say, the Wyatt Davises, the Tevin Jenkins, the guys like that? I know, you could maybe debate him with such a tight grade there, Jackson Carman or Dylan Radins, but what are your thoughts, at least on just the general order here of my top 15 all linemen, right? Like I said, probably going to be the last video unless I get any requests. So if you did enjoy, obviously leave a like. I said leave a comment. I guess the last thing to do would be subscribe, obviously, if you guys did enjoy and want to see more. I know we have been gaining quite a few subs these last few days in the lead up to the draft. So if you enjoyed, we're at 81 now, hopefully 82 by the time you watch, but you could definitely be 82, 83, maybe even 84, depending on how late you're watching this video. So with that being said, that is all I have for you guys today. I'm mic'd up. Now I'm mic'ing out. Peace, guys.